Hello everyone, hi! Let's talk about today why you should read The Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann's 1924 mammoth of a novel of German literature. In case you're not in the loop, I have made a video a couple of months ago titled How to Read The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. I'll link it below, of course. And that is kind of an in-depth analysis and guidance from me on how to approach this monumental work of literature. Anyways, this is the follow-up video to that, because in the previous video I have urged you all to read The Magic Mountain with me over these past 2 months and to send me in your experiences that you have had while reading it. And I have compiled your thoughts together to read out loud in this video to kind of have a conversation about this book and have a little bit of an online book club experience going on. And let me tell you, you all really came through. I was delighted to read your thoughts on the book. Know that if you have sent something in, I have read everything. I'm unfortunately not able to answer every single one of my emails anymore. I'm really sad about that. But know that I have read it and that I have appreciated it. I've taken screenshots, I've taken notes, and I can't wait to share it all with you today. It was actually reading through your little essays that has given me the idea for the title for this video, because if you were not convinced to read The Magic Mountain before, after this video, I think you will be. One last thing before we get into it. For my birthday, I have gotten tickets for The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann that will be staged at the Burgtheater in Vienna. I'm so curious to see how the dramaturgs and everyone kind of translated this huge novel into a piece of theater. I'll make sure to make a little post or something about it. I got it from my wonderful friend and study colleague Sophie. I mean, she's honestly the best at giving gifts. She also got me this little Proust book stand. I don't know if you've noticed it in the back. I don't know, I'm just always so floored and excited by her amazing gifts. I kept the packaging that the book stand was in because I gathered some of you would be interested. So it's from Novellix, a Swedish publishing company. Of course it's Swedish. Yeah, and they have like different... What is that? Oh yeah, it's a bookend. Sorry. And then she also got me this Reclam literature quiz. It's basically full of first lines of famous novels, and then you have to guess which one it is. Okay, enough of the brouhaha, let's get into the video. So how I structured this video is, first of all, there's gonna be a lot, right? It's gonna be a long video. I'm a little daunted, but I'm not gonna rush through it. We'll just chill and hang out. And I've grouped some paragraphs by people together that I thought were kind of in conversation with one another. Like there were some themes that just kept coming back, and I've grouped them together and I'm going to read them together. And then there's also a few reviews that I think would be lovely to just read in its entirety, and I'll sprinkle them in as well. And then the absolute first thing I want to do is to read you the last page of the book, because I just think it's incredibly beautiful. I have been really floored by this translation. I 100% stand by my recommendation from the previous video. It's just very beautiful in English as well. So let's read it together. Farewell, Hans Castorp, life's faithful problem child. Your story is over. You have told it to its end. It was neither short on diversion nor long on boredom. It was a hermetic story. We told it for its own sake, not yours, for you were a simple fellow. But it was your story at last, and since it happened to you, there surely must have been something to you, and we do not deny that in the course of telling it, we have taken a certain pedagogic liking to you, might be tempted gently to dab the corner of an eye with one fingertip at the thought that we shall neither see you nor hear from you in the future. Farewell, Hans, whether you live or stay where you are. Your chances are not good. The wicked dance in which you are caught up will last many a little sinful year yet, and we would not wager much that you will come out whole. To be honest, we are not really bothered about leaving the question open. Adventures in the flesh and spirit, which enhanced and heightened your ordinariness, allowed you to survive in the spirit what you probably will not survive in the flesh. There were moments when, as you played king, you saw the intimation of a dream, of love rising out of death and this carnal body. And out of this worldwide festival of death, this ugly rotting fever that inflames the rainy evening sky all around, will love someday rise up out of this too. It gives me goosebumps every time. That's how I feel right now in the world, honestly. Okay, let's start with talking about the mountain environment a little bit. Some people describe the atmosphere on the Magic Mountain to something akin to how they felt during COVID. Here's a few thoughts by readers that I think sing well together. Peter, with a double T, said, "First off, thank you for creating this book club. I'm truly enjoying this book. One thought I have is that of its setting, not the sanatorium itself, but the surrounding environment. It makes me think of a quote by Cormac McCarthy, where he talked about how the desert have a tendency to create great inner contemplation for the people living there. Now, of course, the Magic Mountain isn't set in a desert, but it made me draw a link between the two, because it seems as though mountains, and especially cold weather, are a reoccurring theme in literature. Perhaps what Cormac McCarthy said about deserts holds true here too. Maybe it's due to the natural solitude that comes being surrounded by weather and environments that could prove to be lethal if one is exposed to it long enough. I'd love to hear your take on it. Anyways, that's just one of my thoughts. I love your YouTube channel, and it has also inspired me to read In Search of Lost Time, which I'm loving almost a bit too much. Might be one of my favorite books ever. So again, thank you. Kind regards, Peter." See, now that's the kind of email I like receiving. Now, that's a beautiful analysis. Does a secluded place like this have the tendency to create greater inner contemplation? I think at first it does, and then it doesn't anymore. Your mail immediately made me think about a quote from the book where it says, quote, "Emptiness and monotony may stretch a moment or even an hour and make it boring, but they can likewise abbreviate and dissolve large, indeed the largest units of time, until they seem nothing at all." Let me explain what I think. The monotony and lack of outer stimulation can create an environment where one would contemplate one's own life more deeply. I think we all think about it in that way, like, oh my gosh, I would like to go to the woods and just have a week by myself so I can reflect on my life or write a book or something. Like, we idealize those places that take us out of society. But at some point, that just becomes the new normal, right? That's what we observe in the book as well. Like, there's a lack of newness, and it makes it very difficult to keep the mind stimulated and to think along new and different lines. Hans really becomes one of the crowd in the Magic Mountain. Like, he just becomes part of that inbreeding of thoughts of the people that stay up there. And it is a very particular kind of person that stays at the Magic Mountain, right? We know that it's very expensive to be there, so by definition you're only gonna have a very small percentage of people who are ever even able to go there. And you can see how that monotony kind of sets in for Hans, and then what really occupies him, or the only thing we keep hearing about, is when something new happens, when a new person arrives, or when he wants to do something he hasn't done before, like going to the snow. I mean, I thought about that for myself, and I think I would become pretty unhappy there after a couple of weeks. Additionally, those people are sick, of course. Here's what Adrian said about sickness. I really like this comment. "I really appreciated the point made a couple of times about how sickness just reduces one to a physical body. It's such a profound point that really encapsulates human fragility. The way a great spirit can be so reduced to the bare basics of life. I recently experienced this with a loved one, and it's really true and shocking and a profound reality check." Going back into the theme of isolation, here's what Mike had to say. One thought that really resonated with me as I read The Magic Mountain was how the isolation of the sanatorium eventually freed Hans to live a life of the mind. COVID lockdown had a similar effect on me. I play in local musical jams, and at first I hated missing the sessions. But as time went on, I developed the guilty pleasure, spending much more time reading almost all of the greatest books that show up in top 100 great book lists. Martin also mentioned something similar. He said, "Few novels have left me with such an enduring sense of place, coupled with a profound sense of displacement." I read it during the early part of the pandemic over the space of a few days, shortly after my first reading of The Plague by Camus. They make an interesting pair. And a comment by Alan among similar lines that I think ties this up very well. The slow time and long descriptions of everyday simple things, walking, talking, eating, was the most interesting challenge I have faced in a book for a long time. So thanks for getting me to read the book. It was at times so frustrating, but at the same time communicated perfectly what life can be like when healing and just living. Overall, it almost felt like a hassle to get through, but then rewarding after, kind of like doing hard work or going for a long walk. But then, how good you feel after. Really interesting. Staying on the topic of this simple and kind of strict schedule, here's a couple of comments that I found really interesting. Olivier Cossat said, "One thing which struck me about the novel is how the rigid rules and timetable at the sanatorium actually make him feel free. From an outsider view, it could feel like being in jail. On the contrary, he doesn't have to think about how he should fill his days and occupy his time anymore, so he can completely immerse himself into the present moment." I remember that I found that very interesting when I first read the book. Yeah, it's hard to make every decision oneself, huh? I think most people would admit that they would appreciate a situation like that every once in a while. Here's a comment among similar lines by a Romeo 17. "It's great. Time in relation to illness/health is fascinating. It really made me think about lots of elements of life, about how much time can be spent really just living in the most basic sense, and how that contributes to our healing. Unless you're really ill, my spirit rebels against so much food and lying down and inactivity as there is in the book, but it's such a fascinating juxtaposition and actually a mirror to our hectic modern life in the flatlands. I'm only about halfway, but I get a very kind of Waiting for Godot vibe, especially from Hans. Couldn't agree more. Okay, moving on from that topic, here is a beautiful short review by Alan. "Maria, thank you for your videos. A few months ago, I watched your Goethe Faust videos. I was just about to begin reading the German and English versions that you recommended when you made the Magic Mountain video, and then I decided to read that book first. A most remarkable book. Most of the chapters I read slowly, but some sections I went through quickly to complete my first reading. I bought a Kindle version so that I could always have the book with me, and will reread chapters as free moments arise. In your video about the Magic Mountain, you pointed out the only sentence in italics in the book. Quote, "For the sake of goodness and love, man shall grant death no dominion over his thoughts." And for you, that was the main point of the book. The strongest statement for me in the entire book was in the chapter Meneer Peperkorn, where it says, quote, "Man himself is divine in that he feels. He is the very feeling of God. God created him in order to feel through him. Man is nothing more than the organ by which God communicates his marriage with awakened and intoxicated life." I love that. For me, that section identifies the purpose of life. For man, through consciousness and awareness, to identify and feel the unique moments of joy that occur in the ever-changing moments of life. To experience joy is the purpose of life, and perhaps the energy of joy is what enables the material of the universe and all life to exist. Thank you again for getting me to read Thomas Mann. How wonderfully worded. I really have nothing to add here. And since we talked about that one italic sentence in the snow chapter, here's what John said about the snow chapter. The section titled Snow, in which Hans plucks up the courage to explore his environment on a pair of skis and gets lost and nearly dies, but has an epiphany in which he achieves something like spiritual maturity, an apotheosis of philosophical insight. Then boldly, decisively, he strikes out for home, where, as you so wisely noted, he forgets everything he learned. This section was one of the best I've read in all literature. If anyone questions Thomas Mann's genius, I would show them this. This section alone could inspire an entire academic thesis, but it's exceptionally beautiful, lyrical, and easy to read. It's also quite moving, and at the same time, funny. Moving on from the high praises, here's a little bit of a contrasting review from someone who didn't enjoy the book as much. And we'll take this email as a little bit of an entry to talk about Hans's character more. So here's Peter saying, "Hi Maria. To be honest, I found it disappointing. I'm surprised by its high reputation and the number of people who place it among their favorite novels. Its reputation suggests that it belongs among the most important works of literature. Over recent years, I've read some of the big books of the literary canon, most notably Proust. Mann's novel didn't seem to me to belong on the same level. I had also read Robert Musil's The Man Without Qualities, which dates from the same era and has a similar concern with the ominous approach of the First World War. Musil's novel is actually longer than Thomas Mann's, running to 3 volumes before he left it unfinished. Musil was Austrian, and his book alternates between satirical portrayals of Austrian society of the time and probing psychological analyses of the main characters. I found it remarkable and want to read it again. I found it strange that Mann should choose as his protagonist such a mediocre character as Hans Castorp, who is neither particularly sensitive nor particularly intelligent. You're right that it is not a Bildungsroman, but at the same time, by the end of the novel, Hans has changed so much, an extent that he couldn't possibly go back to his intended employment in shipbuilding. He has glimpsed the view from high mountains, and the life of the plains is no longer open to him. It is difficult to imagine what he would do, but the final pages suggest that he will be killed in the war, thus resolving the problem. The arguments between Nafta and Settembrini didn't seem to me to be particularly coherent on either side. I was thinking by way of comparison of the discussions between Ivan and Alyosha in the Brothers Karamazov. Ivan has come to contact with modern ideas in Paris, whereas Alyosha has become a monk and is immersed in the Russian Orthodox faith. One has the sense that a great deal is at stake here, and Dostoevsky does not take a clear side in the conflict. The arguments in The Magic Mountain seem rather thin in comparison, particularly when the totalitarian views of Nafta become more obvious. I hardly think such ideas had any attraction for Mann. We know that Hans goes to psychoanalysis session, but we are not giving a description of these. The lectures supposedly on psychoanalysis given to the patients have only the vaguest relation to Freud's ideas. These were topics of fashionable discussion at the time, but I doubt that Mann had actually read Freud. I agree with you that Snow is the best chapter, with the finest descriptive writing in the book. I also like the opening pages, describing his journey to the sanatorium, with their sense of gradually ascending into higher regions, leaving the ordinary world behind. Equally excellent is the evocation of Hans's love for his fellow student at school, that sense of hesitancy, yearning, and admiration so typical of a first love. Mann describes a similar relationship between schoolboys in his short story Tonio Kroger, so we can probably assume it is autobiographical. I've no wish to dampen your enthusiasm for the book, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your thoughts about it. I always hugely enjoy all your videos. Best wishes, Peter. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for sending that in, because I think it's really important to give a voice to people who struggle with a book or who just simply don't like it. There was actually a comment, I think it's either on the previous video or one of the posts on my community page, but it said something along the lines of like, yeah, I'm reading the book, I feel mostly a little bit overwhelmed and confused and kind of in awe that someone could write such a long story, but I'm left with a few question marks as to what to make of it. I actually think a lot of the points you make are very valid. I mean, I haven't paid that much attention to the psychoanalysis things. I don't know how close they are to Freud, and I haven't read the Brothers Karamazov, but I'm planning to this summer, so yeah, maybe I'll remember to get back to you and see if I agree. Overall, I think I felt a little bit like you when I was still reading the book and also when I finished it. On the spectrum of being totally hyped and then kind of not getting it, I was definitely more on the I don't get it side. It was really over the course of the next year that I just kept returning in my thoughts, and then also like actually returning to some chapters that I've kind of realized how immense and beautiful it is what he did there. I don't know, I'm a little bit out of words. So yeah, I'm curious whether time will change your opinion or whether hearing what other people have said will change your opinion, and if not, that's totally fine, of course. Thank you for sending this in to mix it up a little bit. So I want to continue with some comments about Hans. James Duggan said, I'm glad you identified Hans as a shipbuilder rather than, as the translation I used, as an engineer. Oh yes, of course, a shipbuilder or boardwright is a marine engineer, though perhaps that distinction is lost on our generation. But the former is exotic while the latter is pedestrian, at least to the professional sensibility. However, in the context of the story, to distinguish between them helps explain why he resists joining his uncle. Naval yards were then the center, the hub of German militarism. The main character here knows far better than any ordinary person how near the country and the world is to war. Thus his retreat to the mountain is at first tactical, not random. Here's what John has to say about Hans. And here I must admit that I became more than a little confused, Maria. You've told us to remember that it's an anti-Bildungsroman, yet I couldn't help feeling that Hans was maturing rapidly as a character, with his Faust-like grappling with anatomical textbooks and his study of astronomy. He even had the confidence to challenge these two intimidating teachers, Settembrini and Nafta. I felt he was outgrowing his cousin Joachim, who was obsessed with returning to the flatlands and the anti-intellectual life of a soldier. Soldiers can question nothing and must only do their duty and obey orders. And a very short comment by James Duggan, again, was, I think about Hans sometimes. He confuses me. Sometimes I think he makes choices by flipping a coin. Back to John, he has also sent me another email in which he talks about Hans and whether he's being dull. I think this review is really worth reading in its entirety, so here it goes. First of all, your video was really helpful. Your tips were very well chosen, and I have been bearing them in mind as I come across relevant passages in the novel, particularly your comments on the passing of time and the fact that this is an anti-Bildungsroman. But my favorite tip of yours was to notice the irony and appreciate Thomas Mann's sense of humor. there are some very serious commentaries on this novel, and they make it sound dull and difficult to read. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's light, enjoyable, and frequently makes me laugh. I really look forward to spending time with it each day. I just want to interject here for a moment because the irony bit is so interesting. I've read an article yesterday that is basically arguing that we're in an irony epidemic. People cannot be serious anymore, especially on the internet, that it's kind of cringe to be sincere and honest. The article said that often irony is a response to feeling helpless, basically. Right, so you're not hopeful about the world, so all you can do is like make silly little jokes about it. And I then wondered how Thomas Mann must have felt, and how the time between the wars must have felt, and how all you can do in times where you don't feel like you have a lot of influence on what is happening in the world is to make some jokes about it. I think it was a David Foster Wallace interview where he said, "Irony is the song of a bird who has learned to love its cage." Actually, I think David Foster Wallace quoted someone else saying that in that interview. Oh my gosh. I'm quoting someone else. So postmodern of me. Anyways, that's my little interjection on irony. Keeping on with the review. Next, I want to mention 2 points of tension that I find very interesting. The first is how the author manages our responses to Hans Castorp. Mann has deliberately chosen as his protagonist a young man who is neither intellectual nor sophisticated, but on the contrary is quite ordinary, despite being privileged and accustomed to luxury in his life. He might even seem a bit dim. He's certainly not as clever as Thomas Mann, for he's susceptible to the lure of the sanatorium and becomes sucked into the horizontal lifestyle. And yet, Mann makes him very attractive. We can't help but like him. He's sensitive, shy, courteous, and fundamentally a decent human being. This is the key. We recognize in Hans Castorp many of our own characteristics, and this is partly what makes him so delightful and funny. The next point of tension is related to the first, because it's due with Hans's susceptibility to the lure of the horizontal life. Mann is clearly making fun of the way that visitors get trapped by it. A stay of a few weeks turns into months, then years, and as time stands still, and they are held in thrall by the hypnotic daily routine. And yet he makes us wish we were there. So true. From the moment Hans took out his wooden bowl of green lavender-scented soap, ran his silver-plated blade across the perfumed foam of his cheeks, and afterwards slipped into his plaid undershorts and Morocco leather slippers, I was envying every moment of his stay in room 34. So true. 5 meals a day, and beautiful music wafting up from the valley while you lie in your blankets on the balcony. It sounds heavenly. There is a paradox there, which is expressed perfectly in the single word freedom, the title of the section when Hans writes to his uncle to seal his fate and extend his stay in the sanatorium indefinitely. But there is another paradox that is to do with Mann's skill as a novelist. He describes things beautifully. No nuance is missed. The section in chapter 5, when Hans goes to the X-ray, is a brilliant piece of storytelling. The title of this section is "My God, I See It," which exactly captures the ingenuous, open-minded enthusiasm with which Hans confronts and observes life. I'm interjecting once again because I want to say that's so true. I love that section as well. And if you haven't already, go check out the movie. It's in German, but it doesn't matter. I'll link it again below, and watch that X-ray session in the movie. It's really intense. I think it depicts so well how crazy it must have been for people to see the bones inside their bodies, and it's also so well made how the apparatus is this like huge I don't know, kind of terrifying thing. It's great. Okay, continuing on. Anyone who had the honor of being healthy didn't count, we're told early on. But in a wry, funny, and also deep sort of way, the novel is a delightful celebration of life. I can't wait to continue reading it tomorrow. It does somehow make me feel that I am experiencing, to some extent, an extended period of idle luxury. Thank you so much once again for your video introduction to this book. In fact, all your videos, including the ones I haven't yet watched. Best wishes, John. Oh my gosh, I'm getting so hyped about this. Maybe I should do like an online book club or something. This is really great. Here's a couple of funny comments that just made me laugh out loud and that I wanna sprinkle in here for good measure. So here's Livy describing how she tried to get hold of the book when the book club started. Definitely am joining. I've been on a wild goose chase for a physical copy, but it seems like everyone in Sweden decided to read The Magic Mountain at the same time. So I've had to settle for reading it as an ebook, which is not my preferred way of reading, but it means that I can read and compare both the Lower Porter and Wood's translations. The modern Swedish translation is being re-released in a new edition in May, so maybe I'll pick it up and reread my favorite parts in Swedish as well. Have read the first chapter and I'm liking it a lot. The Woods translation flows a little bit better, but Lower Porter might be a bit closer to the original German. I'm already feeling the magic of the mountain, so I'm looking forward to continuing the journey. Oh, I just had to laugh so much at that wild goose chase comment. I've had the exact same experience when I was in Norway last summer in Trondheim. And I was on a wild goose chase after a copy of Hunger by Knut Hamsun, Sult in Norwegian, and I wanted a Norwegian copy because I have just been learning Norwegian and it's a book I know and I wanted to have a copy. And I mean, it's one of the biggest classics of Norwegian literature. I thought I would just have to walk into one bookshop and that's it. And I had to like kind of hop around 3 different bookshops to get it. I was like, this is impossible. John also sent an email that made me laugh. So here it goes. It's time for my second interim update on this monumental novel, a little way beyond the halfway mark. I've calculated that, due to the density of words per page, it's the equivalent of 5 or 6 contemporary novels. This detour into calculation shows that I've succumbed to the intellectual lure of the novel and, like Hans, have begun exploring the mysteries of the universe, not from the contemplative retreat of 5,000 feet, but from the head-spinning vortex of 378,000 words. I love that. Okay, let's read another full review by Tom. To establish the basics, I'm reading the paperback edition of John E. Woods' translation and am about 1/3 of the way through the text. Specifically, I've reached page 233. So my observations are based solely on the first part of the novel, and I may well change my mind as I read further. I've read people's online comments in which they express reservations about embarking upon such a weighty tome of a book as The Magic Mountain, which has somehow acquired a forbidding reputation of being chock full of the worst kind of dense, turgid, Germanic philosophizing. But I haven't found that to be the case at all. Mann writes simply and straightforwardly, at least in the Woods translation he does. And his narrative proceeds in an orderly, expected fashion with no attempts to dazzle the reader with flashbacks, shifting points of view, or other literary devices. So true. His main characters, Hans Castorp and his cousin Joachim Simpson, are 2 young German men whose lives have been free of serious trauma and who carry minimal emotional baggage into the story. They are ordinary, regular good fellows, Joachim a soldier and Hans an aspiring naval designer, whose conversations are free of political discussions about pre-1914 imperial rivalries and the need for Germany to have its rightful place in the sun, as the Kaiser used to say. I think of Hans as an uncomplicated everyman figure. The fact that Mann makes him an orphan is at least partly intended, I think, to simplify the story of his time at the sanatorium. Apart from his uncle, he has no strong family ties to distract him or us from his daily experiences with his fellow patients and what they teach him about life and death. I'm finding The Magic Mountain to be an easy read, with a gemütlich. Sorry, but I don't know how to put the umlaut over the U. I know how to do that. If you have a MacBook, then it's the Option key, so it's 2 presses, what the heck, Tasten, 2 keys to the left of the big Leertaste space bar, oh my gosh, and then you click the U, and then it makes 2 dots on it, and then you have to press the U again. You're welcome. Okay, anyways, I'm finding The Magic Mountain to be an easy read with a gemütlich feel to the novel. Oh, gemütlich, by the way, means kind of cozy and hygge. Hans, Joachim, and the rest of the characters are a likable bunch. The sanatorium, too, seems like a nice place to visit, or even be a patient if required. We almost start to feel we are a resident ourselves, and we repeatedly hear of the daily schedule of doctors, rounds, rest cure periods, temperature taking and other medical treatments, plus the 5 daily meals. There is also the Swiss Alps setting, with its picturesque vistas, pine forests, and scenic hiking trails. For some reason, the sanatorium and its occupants brought to mind the medieval allegory of the Ship of Fools, but I don't think the comparison applies, though I may change my mind as I read further. One thing I found ironic was the discreet manner in which the sanatorium staff deal with their dead patients, hustling their bodies away under the cover of darkness. Little did they know of the 4 years of carnage to come in 14 to 18. As for the philosophizing, that has been administered in small and easy doses so far. The discussions about death being a part of life and how perceptions of the passage of time may differ depending upon our circumstances aren't much different from the conversations my former colleagues and I used to have during quiet periods at work before my retirement. I especially like Settembrini's observation about time and music. Quote, "Music awakens time, awakens us to our finest enjoyment of time." If I had any favorite passages to date, it would have to be those I just read describing Hans's sudden gushing geyser of romantic feelings for Claudia Chauchat, which brought back tender, wistful memories of my own younger self and younger days. Thank you so much for sending that in, Tom. I really enjoyed reading that. Here is a small little comment about Settembrini that I loved and I want to read to you. It's from a Romeo again. I love Settembrini. Sometimes I agree with him and sometimes I don't, but he's so well written. There's something really noble about his humanism, though it is too rational for my tastes. It's a nice reminder, though, of the days when the world thought we could fix everything just with progress. Yeah, those days are over, aren't they? Moving on, there is someone who anonymously sent me a 4-page essay about their experience of reading The Magic Mountain. I'm really getting a taste of what it's like to be a professor over here, and I don't dislike it. So I've chosen a few paragraphs to read you from that. I'm not typically someone with a strong literary background, especially when it comes to classical works. My usual reading revolves around science-related topics, which intrigued me, and I enjoy detective novels in my spare time. I suppose this is different from your literary preferences. However, I find myself increasingly curious about literature, particularly autobiographies that offer a personal perspective on how individuals think, navigate, and challenge problems in their life. When we often encounter well-researched, evidence-based knowledge, I've realized that, even in a modern society surrounded by sophisticated tools, it remains difficult to grasp the unique ways individuals think or experience the world. I am particularly drawn to the kinds of insights that emerge in more personal, in-person settings, especially the leaps of thoughts and spontaneous ideas that often arise in the course of conversation. And later, Specifically, it becomes evident that Hans Castorp holds a biased perspective, shaped by the belief that his grandfather was dispossessed and left behind, something he regarded with a sense of pride, by the force of industrialization and modernization. He maintains a deep, almost reverential connection to his grandfather and views death as something sublime and noble. That's a really good point I have not thought about yet. This leads Hans Castorp to idealize patients, particularly those nearing death, seeing them as embodying a higher state of existence. However, this romanticized view is greatly challenged by the modern rationalist Settembrini, who persistently tries to nudge Castorp towards a more realistic and critical outlook. I believe that Thomas Mann may have intended to depict the inner dilemma and vacillation between his personal inclinations and the broader societal transformations occurring around him. Rather than presenting a coherent or linear narrative of growth through decisive events, he appears to trace a more complex and entangled process of thought. And later again, I think the sanatorium experience depicted in the Magic Mountain can be seen as analogous to the function of the limbic system in the brain, a region often associated with emotional processing and trauma, particularly in its drive to seek closure. In contrast, the brain's executive function, governed by the prefrontal cortex, aims to interrogate past experiences and formulate adaptive responses. However, the limbic system lacks a reliable sense of temporal order, which means that unresolved issues may persist and resurface in cyclical patterns. Concisely, the system doesn't care about clock and calendar. While I would not directly equate the novel's themes with trauma, I imagine that Mann revisited the world of the novel, much like a patient who repeatedly returns to the Berghof, seeking clarity, re-evaluating insights, and engaging in a recursive process of understanding. The sanatorium, in this sense, becomes a symbolic space where time is suspended, allowing for profound contemplation of complex, unresolved questions. And perhaps he relinquished that space either as a necessary step towards moving forward or in response to the inescapable pressure of his historical moment. And a little bit later, the conclusion. Initially, I felt overwhelmed. I wasn't sure I would be able to read through this classical work, especially given its genre was unfamiliar to me and has never been part of my reading repertoire. However, the nuanced presentation of diverse perspectives, each with a distinctive twist, and the author's deliberately impartial writing style resonated with me. As I engaged with the text, the slow process of reflecting on various open-ended questions and occasionally consulting resources to explore their historical context to the era in Europe, gradually evolved into one of the meaningful learning experiences I've ever had. This journey has sparked a desire to explore more literature, and I look forward to immersing myself in similar works. I always suppose that this experience will help my future study of politics and philosophy that are so relatively unfamiliar fields to me, but gradually evoke my interest. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to have encountered this piece, and I would like to thank you for sharing your insights through your YouTube videos, which helped me guide my understanding. Interestingly, the translated version in my native language introduces this book as a Bildungsroman, while the translator, a PhD and a professor specializing in German literature with long-standing expertise, represents a major publisher. The classification appears inaccurate. I appreciate the fact that even as someone outside the field, I can access more accurate information through other channels. I appreciate your book club. I'm looking forward to watching your YouTube videos. It's very thought-provoking. Wow, I truly have no words how much I enjoyed reading all of that. It's so, like, it tickles something in my brain when someone who obviously has an expertise in another field reads literature and brings all of that to the table. I think that's incredibly enriching. I'm so happy that you enjoyed this book, and I have a lot of respect for choosing it, for not being intimidated by its length. I truly hope that your studies of politics and philosophy pan out, because you have a wonderful way of writing and bringing across some complex ideas. Yeah, and actually you writing all of that makes me think that maybe I could recommend this book to my science friends. My science friends. I have some science friends, and sometimes they ask me for book recommendations, and I would never think about recommending them such a brick, but maybe I should. And I also have a recommendation for you. If you haven't read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, I think that's one that you would like based on what you have written. I also have a video about that. I think it's the very first video on my channel. Now, actually, I think I would recommend watching it. It's just ignore the background and the lights and all that. Okay, and now I want to close off this video with some final thoughts by John. He has written, "It was very bold of you to choose such a colossal work for your first Stranger City Book Club title. My goodness, what a lot Mann packed into the last 200 pages. It is impossible to do justice in the small email to the epic sweep of his thoughts. I thought this Everyman translation was excellent. Thank you so much for recommending it. I also listened to it on Audible, following along with the text, and it was read beautifully by David Rintoul. In the last few days, we have all dealt with a thunderbolt of sorts. Total global devastation. So far, the reverberations are being felt only in financial markets, but I wouldn't be surprised if it leads to military escalation, or at least outright physical violence in some form or another before long. The ending is therefore still wholly relevant now. Many of us have for years been cushioned in a sort of magic mountain of tranquil living, easy access to money and an abundance of leisure time, where the quest for spiritual enlightenment has been perhaps our most pressing concern. What a wake-up call we got on Wednesday. Speaking purely selfishly, this means I might have to go on working forever. My dream of the horizontal life, reading weighty European novels, has gone up in smoke. Short stories and a hardback swivel chair will be my future now. I'm going to keep this brief, Maria. I have troubled you enough. If you want a more coherent summary of my thoughts on the Magic Mountain, here's a link to my review. And then John links his review of the Magic Mountain on Goodreads. I'll of course link it in the description box below if you want to read through it. What a downer to end this video on. Very true what you're saying. I've spent a lot of time thinking lately about whether or not it's wise to have children in this world, and how I have grown up so protected and cushioned in a way, right? In the 90s, nothing happened. I don't know, where I grew up, right? I know it's different for everyone, but where I grew up, it just felt like nothing was going on in the world. Like it was just fine. I don't know, there was actually a positive outlook for the future and things like that. So yeah, oh my gosh, knock on wood that things don't repeat themselves in perfect circles. Thinking of a positive thing to end this video with. I, for one, thoroughly enjoyed myself. I honestly wasn't sure how I was gonna like this book club format. I felt a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of reviews that came in, and I wasn't sure whether I'm gonna structure it right. But wow, I feel like my brain has been opened, and when and if I'm gonna read The Magic Mountain again, I'll have so many different avenues to explore now. Let me say I get the appeal of book clubs now. Let me know honestly how that format was for you. That was the best I could do, I think, for free on YouTube. I guess the feeling of the community is not 100% there or something, right? There's no way for all of you to communicate with each other, but Maybe we could do that again. Maybe we could do that on another platform. Let me know what you would like. Also, let me know which books you would suggest to be reading in a book club. And yeah, thank you again so much for everyone who left a comment and sent me an email and sent me entire essays. I truly appreciate you all so much. I get so much nourishment out of making these videos, and yeah, it means the world to me. Thank you. Bye bye.